will just load and show. Because
Okay.
here we go.
Yeah.
Oops.
And if you go like that, and then on camera.
Sorry.
It's easy.
Yeah, so I'll go with the
Do you
program.
want to
Okay.
That one first.
swap them up?
Yeah, it's ready. Excellent stuff. So yeah.
Which one
Oh,
is it?
actually leave that one there. Oh, you have to do it.
Oh, I can get it up.
Maybe I might just check. That's his room. That's his disc there. CI Adelaide presentation.
I'm mumbling to myself.
Is that it? The same one as last night, or you want to?
It's a bit different, but that's... Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that's the one.
Yep.
Great. I'm going to introduce you. I'm Jenny. I guess organising this thing and this thing. So is there anything particular you want to say? I'm happy for me to say. I just got some questions from you. Alright, that's it. That's good. Would you like to say?
No, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I worked in East Africa and but yeah,
I just thought that sure I like you, but you're probably better at introducing yourself.
Yeah.
Because we met you. So
That's always an issue.
Oh, you got my names. I need my phone. Is it blowing it? Good morning, everyone. Does that work? Did that make a noise? Okay. Hello. Welcome to the last day of the conference. We've got some fantastic keynotes lined up this morning. Before we get into it, I just want to extend a thank you to everyone, the presenters, the attendees, the staff in Science Monitoring and Knowledge for the immense amount of help in getting this event off the ground. I've enjoyed the last couple of days. I'm excited that it's the last day. There might be some sleep coming. But thank you. Thank you to everyone for the positive comments and supporting the event. First up today we have Dave Emmett, and I've just dropped my notes over here. So I'm going to walk over casually, very casually back. Dave is Senior Vice President of the Asia Pacific Field Division for Conservation International. He completed his degree in zoology at the Imperial College London before working in Malawi, Tanzania and Madagascar. We welcome him to give his keynote. Thank you.
Thank you. Just check you can, yes you can, definitely hear me. So thank you very much, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been living in the Asia-Pacific region now for about 15 years. After working in East Africa, I moved over to Cambodia for a 6-month period, and then after 9 years or so with Conservation International there, was offered the role of managing the entire Asia-Pacific Field Division, so now I'm based in Singapore as our hub. And we've just signed a partnership with the university here for a collaborative program of work in the Asia-Pacific region, so it's very exciting. What I wanted to talk a bit about was, I guess, the evolution of conservation a little bit in the region, the application of conservation in the region, and the importance of technology in conservation nowadays. And technology is always good. I'll try and get this to work. Come on. It's very important, technology.
Right. Perhaps default to the monitor.
I shall use this. So, some of you may not have heard of Conservation International. We have about 900 staff. We work all around the world. We have programs of work in Africa, South America, and the Asia Pacific. We're based in Washington, D.C., so it's good for us because we're on the other side of the planet from our headquarters and we can just get on with the work. We have, in the Asia Pacific region, we have about 1/3 of all of the staff. We have our actual programs of work primarily in China, in the Greater Mekong, in Indonesia, the Philippines, and down into the Pacific, where we work through the framework of the Pacific Oceanscape through the Pacific Island Forum. And we have offices in Auckland University, and then in Fiji, Samoa, New Caledonia, and Papua New Guinea. This is a very quick summary of the sort of things we've been doing over the last 20 years. It's a couple of years out of date, but it gives you a bit of a feel for the sort of work we do, and also that we're not an NGO that does the work all ourselves. We work very much through partners, and that includes providing a lot of grants, providing training for students, working with universities, setting up local NGOs so that we can transfer our programs over. So right now we're in the process of closing out our program in Papua New Guinea and transferring it over to a local NGO that we set up as a sort of a transition and growth of our work in the region. So as you can see, we provided now it's about 8,000 grants for students or national academics or government partners to receive further training to be able to do their jobs well. Because in places like Timor-Leste, Cambodia, etc., they don't often have the capacity they need to do their job, and they don't have the ability in that country to fulfill their potential. So this is where partnerships with universities such as Adelaide is extremely important. So Conservation International, our remit really is to show how people rely on nature. It's not pure biodiversity, it's showing that ecosystems provide ecosystem services that we rely on, and that really the future of our societies in these developing countries depends on the way we manage our natural resources. And I think that signifies a real shift in, at least in our conservation approach over the last sort of 30, 40 years. In the past, we focused on biodiversity, so that was identifying what Conservation International set up as hotspots and then key biodiversity areas that are really important for conservation of the most endangered species around the world. And that moved, the process there was on setting up protected areas. Then we moved more into improved management of protected areas, sustainable financing of protected areas, and the connectivity of different protected areas. What we have realized over time, though, is that creates a disconnect between people and nature that doesn't actually allow us to understand and value the connections between nature and people. Sort of building a wall around something and saying that's a protected area, we shouldn't touch it, doesn't show people that they actually rely on the services from that protected area, whether it's pollination or water or whatever it may be. And also there's a very, very strong link between nature and agriculture. I mean, in Indonesia, agriculture is the major driver of deforestation, and yet the agriculture relies upon the flow of fresh water from the watersheds that need to be forested. So looking at it from the larger perspective is the way to show that connectivity, and that's why we're working now in these larger, what we're calling a sustainable landscape. So that's at the level of West Papua or North Sumatra or Cambodia. It's like an entire, or in the Pacific, it's an entire EEZ, a whole of domain approach, which brings in a lot more complexity, but ultimately is something that will allow everybody to incorporate nature into development plans, into social sort of integration. So it's the right way to go, but it requires a lot of partnerships. And it means we're not doing lots of scattered projects anymore. We're consolidating in a couple of core areas where we can have a real impact. And for example, in Indonesia, it's the third highest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. And of that, I think something like 45% of it comes from deforestation. So if you can have an impact at scale in reducing deforestation in Indonesia, it has a global impact, which is what we all want, because we all breathe the air, and we want our children to live in a country that's not 4 degrees hotter than it already is, although it's quite cold out today, but that's another story. During the same sort of time, there's been a lot of changes in technology as we've moved from biodiversity to these larger landscapes. And nowadays we have the ability to get high-resolution satellite imagery from every part of the planet. And we've just been given access to NASA data because they were told that they needed to sort of open up their satellite imagery files for open access. I think the European Space Agency recently sent up a satellite that is also open access data. I mean, this is incredible. You can basically see, you can get to every part of the planet, and you can use radar to get below the tree canopy to see if it's flooded forest or mangrove or whatever. So this is really powerful technology that changes the way we work. In the middle here, this was me about, just looking at my hair color, this was probably about 15 years ago, in Cambodia teaching government rangers and students how to use a GPS. And then there isn't a photo from the 80s because we didn't have digital cameras at the time, and all of my films have degraded over time, so we haven't got anything from there. The technology has changed so fast, even in my lifetime. So some of the key advances in technology and the application of that to conservation on the ground, that's something that's really interesting. I mean, somebody said to me recently that the future of conservation is in science to some extent, but the vast majority of our advances will be in technology. It's in improving our efficiency. It's in being able to monitor very, very large areas without having to get the engine out or, go out in this large ocean area that you can see here. This is something called the Phoenix Islands Protected Area in Kiribati, and we helped the government there put in place a large marine protected area, and rather than having to go out there and do patrols every single day, you can use these vehicle, VMS, vehicle monitoring systems to actually track the boats, and you can see from the imagery how well it's worked. It's really helped people stay away. You've obviously still got to go in. You can't rely on technology all the time, because someone could just turn that off and go in and go fishing. But it's allowed us to do more with our conservation dollars, and conservation dollars are limited, and our time is limited. So this is for me, this is very, very exciting. And also for things like big programs of work like RED, forest management programs, you need to have a transparent, replicable process for understanding forest cover, and these sort of satellite imagery helps you with that. And ultimately it does guide, what we want is to guide government policy so we can see whether protected areas or large management units within a sustainable landscape are actually working. Are palm oil concessions creeping into the forest? Are they staying within those areas? and you don't have to wander around and ground truth it with a GPS anymore, which takes away some of the fun, but it's also, a lot less tiring. Protected areas as well. Management of protected areas has completely changed. Now you have things like smart technology that allows you to have a series of criteria for managing protected areas, which allows you to compare one against another. I think there's now the IUCN are developing a green list of protected areas. It's a real game changer. And in the past, we used to walk around the forest with a camera looking for wildlife. And now you put the camera trap up, and you don't have to get too close to the crocodiles to actually record all of this information. And for cryptic species especially. And also you can get a better understanding of the implications of trade, etc., and you can start looking at trends. So we've developed a tool in partnership with Hewlett-Packard, which allows us to pull in all of the camera trap data, huge quantities of data, and then manage them in a way that allows us to look at trends in biodiversity in protected areas, in connective areas of forest or whatever, all around the world. And it also allows us to understand the trends in biodiversity and potentially the drivers of those changes. So just purely the management of the data, let alone the collection of it, is a huge game changer for us. And we're finally able to quantify what we've always talked about as opinion. We think the number of lions has decreased over the last 20 years, but there's nothing quantitative. Now we've got that at our fingertips. Species monitoring, we still do in the region quite a lot of work. Whether we're working in a huge landscape, we still have to focus on monitoring charismatic and sort of keystone species. This is some work we did on whale sharks. I'll just show you, in case you're wondering how we managed to catch that little beast. It's about 7 meters long. This is in West Papua. They actually go where the local fishermen are catching these small fish. The whale sharks will come along and start feeding from the net. So we would basically, they frequently, they're not super smart. So the fishermen they don't mind this because they get more money from tourism than they do from the fish nowadays. But sometimes they get caught in the net, and then we have been going in and attaching the latest technology that we'd helped design in satellite tracking devices. And the results have been, even in the last few months, the results have been outstanding. And our team have this on their laptops, and they get feedback from the various whale sharks on a daily basis. So I think I'll stop his feeding. He'll keep going for quite some time. So you can see here, this is the tag we put on the dorsal fin of this particular whale shark. And there was an assumption that they were real homebodies and they stayed in this one bay in West Papua, but we found that they were moving to completely different sites at certain times of the year. They were going out into the deeper water, going down to 1.5 kilometers in depth. We don't know why. Moving down to PNG, moving up to the Philippines, disappearing into Australian waters. So this has led to the expansion of the entire protected area network for whale sharks in Indonesia. I'll get past him going quickly. This is work we did in Indonesia with mantas. This guy is not spearfishing, although we've had a few tourists trying to stop our team from doing it because they thought we were trying to kill the manta. We're attaching a tag, and we're, again, same sort of thing, tracking them. And as you can see from this bottom map, the government put a lot of money into tourism in Bali around manta tagging, but they didn't know that the mantas were also migrating a couple of times a year to Lombok, where there was hunting grounds, and people were selling the gill rakers for $6,000 or $7,000 to China. So that actually, this research led to a blanket ban in manta hunting across all of Indonesia because the government realized that there were economic advantages to stopping it. So this is where an example of technology, even at a very simple scale, changing government policy and really having a major impact on the environment. Something we couldn't do in the past because we would be saying, well, we think maybe they're moving over there, but we're not quite sure, and it's all anecdotal. There's an awful lot of technology that we're using now when we're looking at these larger sustainable landscapes. For example, the governor of West Papua has said, we would like this to become a conservation province. They're going to announce it formally, I think, maybe this month or next month. 92% of the province is heavily forested, and they're saying we want to develop our economy in a way that doesn't compromise the natural resources. So, well, where should they grow palm oil? What are the most important areas of lowland forest? All of these involve incredibly complex modeling, especially when you fold in climate change and you look at the implications there, and you look at ridge to reef. And suddenly, when you've got all of these large amounts of data and you're predicting different scenarios, you need high levels of technology. This is things we just simply couldn't do in the past, and now we can actually go to these areas and show the provincial governor, the local communities, the implications of what they're doing on downstream or upstream environments. So this has been a huge, huge process. We've been working a lot with Starbucks as an example of our corporate partnerships, showing them, modeling the impacts of climate change on coffee production and showing them how they need to change either their varieties or their practices. So now Starbucks is actually 99.9% shade-grown coffee, which is something that's also been very, very recent, and it's extremely important. The last thing I was going to mention is the importance of the technology that we all take for granted, which is social media. I was thinking the other day, there's no such thing really nowadays for most people as going online, because we're always online, we're always connected. I had to put my phone on mute because someone's going to be WhatsApping me from somewhere in the world or Skyping or something. Connectivity is everywhere, and there are good and bad components to that. It does mean that, for example, in protected areas, remote protected areas, now when the rangers go on patrol, people from nearby villages can text their friends who are up in the mountains cutting down a rosewood tree and say, watch out, the guys are on their way. But it also means that the rangers themselves are able to keep in contact, and if they find something important, they can actually refer it straight back. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I think we all see this sort of technological arms race in some areas to some extent. But it is really important, from a conservation perspective, to have that immediate connectivity. If somebody does something in the forest now that they shouldn't, for companies clearing forest for palm oil, the world can know about it almost instantaneously. You can just film it and send it out there and it can go viral, and suddenly everybody knows that company X is doing something that they shouldn't. That gives us a real power in having public pressure on companies and on governments to do the right thing. And we're seeing that, especially in palm oil, with companies really having to make the step towards sustainable palm oil because simply there is consumer pressure on that. And the last thing I'm going to show you is we've developed something that we called Nature is Speaking, because there's a reality, I think, that we all have a close connection to nature, and obviously here in Australia you're very much surrounded by it, but many places in the world people have lost that connection to nature and they don't quite understand the importance it has on their life. So we worked with a lot of very well-known celebrities to give a voice to nature. And it sounds, when I was told about this, I was thinking that sounds a little bit, yeah, okay, but it's a bit sort of Hollywoody. But actually it's been hugely, hugely successful. And it starts a conversation, and it helps people to understand the importance of nature. And I think with the Paris COP and the whole sort of consumer push for sustainability, and the reality that no matter how rich we are or where we live in the world, we all breathe the same air and we all have the same planet that our children will inherit, that there's a real, finally, understanding that environmental issues are not sort of some trendy thing. It's actually the basis of our entire future. So the last thing I wanted to just show you quickly was this video clip that just sort of pulls that all together.
Some call me nature. Others call me Mother Nature. I've been here for over 4.5 billion years, 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I have fed species greater than you, and I have starved species greater than you. How you choose to live each day, whether you regard or disregard me, doesn't really matter to me. One way or the other. Your actions will determine your fate, not mine. I am nature. I will go on. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. That was fantastic. Are there any questions for Dave? Come on. There must be somebody. Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks, Dave. That was really inspiring. I was just wondering, how do you work with the Indonesian government and those governments around when you find out those things and go to negotiate making changes?
It's tough because sometimes you want to just throttle them. Other times you realize that many people are trying to do the right thing. I was working in Cambodia for 9 years, and you see that some people have purely got a vested interest in making as much money as they can. But in the long run, you have to work with certain ministries, you have to work with the government, and they are the ones that can make the change. So if you push too hard, you find yourself on the outside. So change comes from within, and we have to make sure that we work with the governments. And there are partners like Greenpeace who highlight the issues that they're doing wrong, and we work with them to find the solutions. And that way works really well. We do the same thing with companies. So there could be a lot of criticism of a palm oil company until they say, okay, we're going to do the right thing, we're going to work on sustainability issues, and then we come in and work with them. If we find that they're not doing it the right way, or they're actually just paying lip service to conservation, then we'll step away. And that's where we can encourage people to highlight these issues. One of our board members is Harrison Ford, and he went to Indonesia recently, last year I think, and for a film called The Years of Living Dangerously, and highlighted the inadequacies of some of their protected area management systems. We didn't go into the meeting with the Minister of Forestry that he went into, because we kind of knew it would be pretty sensitive. But then we followed up immediately afterwards to help the government to sort of do the right thing. But it's tough. You're always walking a fine line.
Do you do anything about protection of rangers? We've heard recently on ABC radio of the rangers who have been killed in Africa as they've attempted to defend elephants and other wildlife.
Yeah, we've had this in Cambodia as well, where rangers are out there trying to protect the forest, and they end up finding themselves up against some very powerful people. And I think the number of rhinos in 2015 that were killed were 1,400 almost in Africa, which is 4 times more than almost any other year. That's 4 a day. My maths, 4 a day. That's $80,000 per kilo. So you can imagine the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going into illegal trade, and it's a very, very lucrative business. So it's a big, big issue. And that's why I think technology is actually helping to take people out of the front line to some extent, where you can actually, like in the mountains in Cambodia, we were doing getting satellite imagery, and now we're using drones technology that was developed in a partnership here in Adelaide University, where the drones are the ones going over the forest and looking down and finding people doing illegal forest clearing. And then it allows the rangers to go into that particular place in a very direct manner, knowing exactly what they're walking into. So I think technology will actually be saving lives as well. It makes the ranger patrols more efficient and safer. And sometimes we know that if there's a whole group of people illegally hunting tigers in the forest, it's such a dangerous place that we will actually arrange a huge sort of cohort of police and military waiting for them when they come out. So technology has had some extraordinary advances in that respect, and I think it will help save lives in the future. But it's in some places, like in Africa at the moment, it's more like a war zone. It's quite terrible.
Time for one more question if we have.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting, but I wonder how you tackle the issue of, I suppose the common term is big data. All of these technologies that are digitally based are based on enormous amounts of data. They have to be, I suppose, assessed regularly. You need people to be able to do that, who understand what's required. You have to be able to store it, but more than that, it's coming in all the time. Do you have an effective strategy for managing that without staying up very late at night and getting grey hair and things like that?
Yes, we do that through partners. For example, a couple of areas where we get enormous amounts of data are satellite images and camera trap photos, because nowadays you have digital cameras out there that are just snapping away thousands of images, and some of them you really have to look quite hard at, and you can easily get overwhelmed so that you're just swept away by the onslaught of the camera trap images coming in. So in camera trap perspective, we're working with Hewlett-Packard, and they've developed some software. We've got all the data stored on the cloud, and we've got, they have provided us with the equipment needed to handle this sort of big data, and we've worked with them to develop software that allow rapid review of all of the camera trap photos, for example, and then that allows us to work out what is there, and then also use that information for conservation, I guess, adaptive management, which is the whole purpose of it, to say, well, okay, it looks like the tapirs in North Sumatra are declining rapidly, we better sort of look at what's going on. With the satellite imagery, this has been a partnership we forged with NASA because they've got the technology to handle very, very, very big data. And that's the thing, most of what we do is working through partnerships because we can't do it all. We can't do an awful lot. What we can do is we can work on a bigger component of work, a sustainable landscape or whatever it might be, and then have partners supporting as needs be. So NASA are handling huge amounts of the data that we need to oversee forest cover change analyses and modeling programs for Indonesia, for example, or Brazil. So it's, yeah, but it's tough because, I mean, my computer was at one point absolutely full of photos of camera trap data, and you have to just try and go through it all. So it's, yeah, we've had to very quickly, as technology has advanced, we've had to have these advances in data storage and management.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We can just, thanks, Dave. Okay, I'd next like to welcome Professor Michelle Waycott. Michelle holds